Hello and welcome. Before we start, I'd just like to apologize in case this causes offense to anyone. This video isn't an attack on any kind of religion or belief or set of beliefs. It is meant to be sort of a different perspective. I mean, it's by no means a new perspective, but it is different from what most people have grown up with anyway. So I'd just like to mention, if you can't be bothered listening to me ramble on and waffle, feel free to check the contents in the description. You can skip the intro and, go to the parts that you want to go to. So firstly, this is my first video, so I feel like I will start off by introducing myself. So my name's Oscar. I'm currently 24 years old. I'm half Irish and half Swedish. I currently live in Liverpool. What more is there to say? And I'm also studying psychology. So I have a little bit of a history, shall we say, in terms of religion and spirituality. I've had a very, very enlightening retreat for starters, and then which basically opened my eyes in a whole new way, really. And then I also did this walk called the Camino de Santiago, which really helped put things into perspective for me. From this stemmed a deep sort of interest in just religion and spirituality in general. So I'm just going to present my take on it. There will be many kind of references to Christianity because that is the society I've grown up in. So I feel like I know it a bit more than a lot of the other religions, though in reality this video addresses a lot of the major religions. I'm not going to say all, because you also get religions like the Flying Spaghetti Monster and Dudism from the Big Lebowski, but in terms of most religions anyway, I'm going to try and provide a perspective. So this video is designed more for materialists and atheists. However, it does require an open mind and a willingness to learn rather than shutting it off because it doesn't fit in with the views that you already have. That being said, most people can benefit from it, whether you're agnostic, Christian, or anything like that. I mean, this might be interesting for you as well. So everyone knows what religion is, all right? Although it's hard to define. It seems fewer and fewer people are believing in religion today anyway. This is probably partially due to the vast amount of scientific research coming out that, people are sort of looking at, scientific approaches, believing in things that can be proven. This is sort of an increasing source of critique on religion as well. School systems also focus on proof and evidence-based things. And then there's the realization that religious texts are texts from a long time ago with no real author or evidence. So one might consider it to be superstitious stories about people who may or may not have existed. Not to mention some texts have been translated multiple times and they could have been mistranslated. Each text sort of evolving over the years could have had a sort of Chinese whisperer effect, if you see what I mean, where it's passed down and rewritten and possibly even altered a little bit. Words also change their meaning over time as well. So if somebody says a word in the Bible, for example, that word may mean something different today than what it meant back then. Not to mention there are so many different interpretations. There are different ways to interpret it. It makes it really hard to figure out what it's actually trying to say sometimes. And there are so many different religions and sects that are seemingly in conflict with each other as well. So how would you know which one is the right one? And then the scientific text seems to conflict with religious views. And then this lack of logic and the atrocities sort of committed by religious people as well has sort of created this kind of negative view of religion. So all these things are true. Religion even contradicts itself many times. For example, an all-forgiving God who wiped out every living creature on the earth, wants to get rid of homosexuals, calls them an abomination, condemning people eternally in pain for not following this God's rules, or for being born into the wrong culture even. I wouldn't call that an all-forgiving God personally. So many people still believe and have believed for thousands of years. Most put it down to cultural development. We have a capacity for brainwashing. People aren't as smart as we think. People conform and follow the masses without question because they aren't aware enough to even realize that that is what's happening. People believe without proof or question of source critique. It's almost like people believe something over another because that's what they've heard first, despite any evidence that suggests the contrary. Even the people who do question themselves usually only do so once and then become so stuck with that view that if you even go against them at any point, they'll feel attacked. They would accuse the person of not allowing them to have their own perspective. But if you ask someone who is religious why they believe, a lot of them, or if not most of them, will speak about experiences that they've had. Most atheists say that there's no proof or it's just blind faith, but within psychology, economics, many other fields of study, that are considered valid, a lot of them are based off statistics. So I submit that there is plenty of statistical evidence of religion when considering the vast number of people who have had these experiences. Like, if you think about monks who spend all day in temples praying and meditating, including former atheists, they're not doing that for a bit of fun or because they have nothing better to do. Whether you believe or not is inconsequential, seeing that they obviously experience something from it. So there might be something to it. People might say placebo is a factor, but placebo is still something that's kind of quite unexplained, and it ties in with the many teachings of faith itself. So one big argument I've heard is that people want to believe in an afterlife or something higher because it gives them some feeling of comfort. It's also some sort of answer to the big questions of why are we here, for example. But that doesn't explain how a lot of the religions and religious texts don't actually speak a lot about that. They're more about what's here and now. Many people say that there are too many assumptions, but when you think about it, the only thing we know is that we experience. Everything else is an assumption. So in reality, isn't the materialist standpoint making just as many assumptions? And reality is highly subjective to personal experience. Despite the vast complexity of the brain and our lack of understanding of such, can something as vast and insane as experience, consciousness, and thought really be put down to a series of electric impulses? Within the biological perspective to psychology, there's this axiom that there's a cause and effect relationship. But we know that if we alter the brain, it changes our experiences, but we also know that our experiences alter the brain. So how can we say it's cause and effect? I submit it may be more of a correlation. So many of these are not necessarily causes alone in themselves question materialism, but if you put them all together, it may be worth looking into. If you think about our evolutionary mental capacity, we must accept the probability of our own limitations and capacity for comprehension. Hence, we must accept that we do not know and cannot know all that there is to know, really. So if you look at it like this, if you imagine what it would be like to be a dog for a second, you'd run around, you'd bark at things, look for food, but you'd have no comprehension of mathematics or politics or even language. So what makes us so sure that we as humans can comprehend all that there is to comprehend? Personally, I think it's arrogant of humanity to believe that that is the case. Due to this incomprehension these things are indescribable. Take the first line of Taoism, for example. The first line in the scriptures of the Tao is, "The Tao that is spoken of is not the true Tao." This, in a sense, means we cannot speak about it because it's indescribable. If you try and describe it, it's not true. One could even say Jesus didn't understand it. He spoke, for example, about the peace that passeth understanding. So we use a means of interpretation within our realm of understanding and consciousness to make sense of it. So what if throughout history people had developed insights into this, whatever it is that's incomprehensible? To use a crude example, for example, like a dog might develop an insight into language and learn the word sit, but it won't understand language, just as we we wouldn't have understood this incomprehensible thing. Thing is a bad word, but so in order to describe it or even interpret it, we used the only means that we had available. We used symbols and language to try and describe what's indescribable. Or it's possible that the people who had these experiences, who had these insights, their minds were turning it into something that they could understand, and so they would have experienced these symbols or these different interpretations. It's also why religion has so many abstractions, such as death, war, love, charity, truth, and so there's this sense of ambiguity. But because of this, it is of course very open to misinterpretation and miscommunication. I mean, following this logic, any belief or idea in itself is by default, by definition, a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation. But would you not say that possibly continuous learning and questioning and constantly bearing in mind the fact that we don't understand and we don't comprehend it may bring us a little bit closer to the truth, or if not the truth, a more personally suited interpretation of the truth. But obviously different cultures around the world, different people who have developed these insights will have interpreted it in different ways, because we are different as people, we have different minds. So hence why you may get so many different religions that look so different but really might be describing the same thing. So for example, while a Christian might say God, a Muslim might say Allah, Taoists might say the Tao, Buddhists, they'll say everythingness or nothingness, really. So because different cultures have different symbols, and people have grown up with those symbols, that would also explain why when somebody has a religious experience, they only seem to see symbols from their own religion, well, most of the time. So it's why, you don't get many, Hindus seeing Jesus or many Christians seeing Krishna, for example, because they already associate those experiences with those symbols. So when they have an experience, their mind interprets it in a way that they understand and that's familiar to them. But what is interesting is that those who practice being conscious or being aware, I'm referring to meditation now, often speak about very similar, if not the exact same things. Feelings associated with this are all very similar across the board. There's love, peace, bliss, understanding, awareness, wakefulness, unity, connection, equality. And religion almost always has a basis in those ideas. One might say that there's been a mass misinterpretation. I mean, generally in regards to the original writings centered around presence and or awareness. I mean, any interpretation is an interpretation, including the believed to be literal fundamentalism. A lot of the scriptures and texts are highly metaphorical and often are quite vague, so it's really impossible to interpret a text literally. This could be another explanation into why fundamentalists differ in their beliefs, even though they all believe that they are reading it literally. I mean, religion is often made up of stories and parables to demonstrate meanings and concepts. They are religious texts and not history books. I've heard a quote saying that religion is the finger pointing at the moon, but people have become too busy sucking on the finger that they forget to actually look at the moon being that which is indescribable, the incomprehensible. I mean, even if you look at Christianity in itself, I mean, it's got a strong basis in the afterlife, but as far as I'm aware, they never actually literally said when you die, you go to heaven. There's a lot of reference to, you will reach the kingdom of God, but they don't say after death. What if the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven was another way of describing what the Buddhists refer to as enlightenment? I think one problem is people's inability to understand or accept the idea of the absence of self or the absence of ego. Therefore, there is an unwillingness to accept the idea or even possibility of no self. Often in religion, there is a theme of the immaterial, Materialists would have a real issue wrapping their head around the idea of the immaterial, as anyone would in reality. One reason being is it feels quite unproven or impossible to prove, but we all know that the immaterial things do exist. For example, thoughts, emotions, subjective experiences of morality, ideologies, basically anything abstract is not material. But we are not subject to the thoughts and abstractions of other people. And I'm aware that materialists believe that they are derived or created by the brain, which is a material thing. But however, the concepts are still immaterial. Hence, it does exist. I mean, if you look at mathematics, there's a big question, is it discovered or invented? Personally, I say it's both. It's based on the definition of mathematics, but mathematics is abstract until we assign the numbers to material things. I'm aware it is a bad example because it is a measurement of material things, but a lot of these concepts cannot be comprehended by anyone who's not subject to them. Try and imagine the concept of thought itself or the concept of emotion. All that happens is you imagine a thought or you imagine an emotion and what it feels like, but that isn't the concept of it itself. So why are we so adamant that the immaterial outside ourselves, outside our own consciousness, cannot exist, and that there is nothing beyond our comprehension due to us not being subject to it? The problem is that there is no way to grasp any inexperienced immaterial concepts, but that's why people make these symbols or use symbols to try and describe them. So people try to imagine immaterial concepts by bringing them into comprehension, but the problem with this is that you're trying to imagine an immaterial material thing, if that makes sense. So with these symbols, people try to imagine something that is immaterial in a material way, but that's just because we can only imagine material things. We can't imagine immaterial things that we haven't experienced. So if somebody had never experienced emotion, this would be the equivalent of them thinking of emotion as a heart and trying to imagine an immaterial heart. Our inability to imagine anything that isn't material demonstrates my point in the incomprehensibility of these concepts. The two concepts, material and immaterial, are contradictory. So the attempt to imagine something that's immaterial when we can only imagine what is material is in vain. So imagining a immaterial contradicts itself, and in reality makes no sense. So people find the idea of the immaterial to be illogical, ungraspable, and incapable of existence. Religion uses symbols to describe the immaterial, including concepts within human comprehension. For example, one might say that the devil is a symbol that describes temptation or attachment to thought. So across religions, you may find so many very similar themes. So for example, there is suffering. The Buddha says life is suffering. It's just one of the noble truths. But the word we translate into suffering is actually dukkha, which refers to an unhinged or unbalanced wheel. The idea is that things are never quite right. And this is due to our own attachment to greed and possession and power, etc. There's nothing wrong with going for these things, of course, but it's the attachment or obsession that is our undoing. We also go alienated, thinking that we are our thoughts, when our true selves lie beneath them. Suffering is different from pain. Suffering is a mental struggle. Believe it or not, it is subjective to our immaterial personal thought. Through awareness, pain can become just another part of the scenery, neither good nor bad. And people can reach enlightened states through it. Our minds may have an unwillingness to accept, but eventually may submit to acceptance and hence become simply aware, sparking a massive insight. Another theme is acceptance. Through acceptance, we learn not to be attached to everything. We learn not to be consumed by constant want. We learn how to be happy and fulfilled. Happiness comes from within, it isn't external. Acceptance is not the same as submission. One can accept an event has happened, but still change it. Another theme is surrender. So this involves not fighting battles that we can't win, not making enemies of things that need not be enemies. These also relate to thought and relates to acceptance. Temptation is another theme. Our greed is often a source of negative things which make us unhappy. Attachment Related to a previous point, attachment to thought, or the little ego, which is the thought-based self, is the core of suffering. By not being attached, but simply aware of the world around our thoughts and emotions, we become enlightened and learn to control our lives and live in bliss. This could also be related to the 7 deadly sins. The 7 deadly sins are 7 different categories of attachment to the little ego. So religion is not a literal system or belief. It is simply the awareness of unknowing. It is presence, it is awareness, hence awakening. So spirituality often covers these things. Spirituality can be literal as well, but often is an incorporation of several aspects of religion. When it isn't literal, it's still an incorporation of religious views, only separate from the attachment of immaterial materialism, focusing on presence and not beliefs. However, beliefs come with it. It is an attempt to describe incomprehensible ideas symbolically, and once we look past these symbols, we see the same ideas beneath them all. It is then the route to fulfillment, the cure for suffering, depression, anxiety. It is the key to happiness. Even without the belief, meditation in itself will help, and there's plenty of journal articles to prove that as well, or support that. Sorry, we don't like to use the word prove. So tell me what you think of this video. As I said, it is my first. Tell me if I've covered too much or too little, if it helped you understand a new perspective, or if it helped formulate your view in the comments below. You're welcome to dispute anything. I myself am constantly trying to learn and question myself. I'm open to hear opinions. However, you will have to expect me to argue my point back. That doesn't mean your dispute isn't considered. But contradicting views and debates is how we learn. If you like this video, just click like. More videos will come in soon, hopefully a bit more specific. If you didn't like it, you were welcome to click dislike. I am open to feedback, and peace, love, acceptance, and understanding.